Okay, so this video we're gonna cover the chapter on substance and form. This is chapter 6 from John Dewey's Art as Experience. And as I was mentioning in earlier videos, there's going to be a lot of stuff here that's really optional viewing. You don't really need to know this stuff to understand Dewey's overall theory of aesthetics. So, especially for my students, you got enough stuff to worry about, I think, already with your final paper. Unless you're writing your paper on Dewey, particularly, you might want to go and watch this video. Or if you got spare time during the COVID crisis and you're really that interested, go for it, right? I hate to say that because I know that's probably going to decrease the views on YouTube, but whatever, right? Just kind of keeping it real. So this video, again, we're going to look at selections from chapter 6 on substance and form. Let's go and just get right into it. I want to try to keep this video pretty short. I'm just going to read this quote here, and we'll go from there. The fact that form and matter are connected in a work of art does not mean they are identical. It signifies that in the work of art, they do not offer themselves as two distinct things. The work is formed matter. Okay, so he's rejecting the view that form and matter are identical, but the common assumption that they are, right, that there's sort of the common connection that we make between them, at least, signifies for him that they offer two distinct things. The work is formed matter, right? They're sort of inseparable. Okay, matter is attached to the work. Work is always material in some sense, but they're legitimately distinguished when reflection sits in, right? When we start thinking about them, we start theorizing about them, as it does criticism and theory. We are then compelled to inquire as to the formal structure of the work, and in order to carry on this inquiry intelligently, we must have a conception of what form is generically. So this is what he's going to set out to do in this chapter. I honestly don't think he does a very good job. He's pretty obscure about this. He doesn't give enough examples, I think, to really clarify his point. I'm going to try to help him out here, and by the end of the video, I think we'll actually get started on chapter 7. I'll do the first quote because he defines form at the very beginning of chapter 7. Chapter 7 is titled "The Natural History of Form," and so that's where we'll end this video. But so like I'm warning you, bear with me. A lot of this stuff is very abstract. You didn't already gather that from the title of this chapter, and even just this first quote. So he says, we may get a key to this idea of form, like what it is generically. We may get a key to this idea by starting from the fact that one idiomatic use of the word makes it equivalent to shape or figure. Okay, so again, in the comments, and when I talk about form and the form of an object, a lot of times I'm using this synonymously with shape. Now, of course, an art major might not see that. See the picture I have here of shape and form. The art major is going to see shape as flat, two-dimensional. Form has a sort of depth, right? There's shading in there. That's a sphere, and to the left is the circle, right? But for Dewey, he's getting, as a philosopher, he's looking at the tradition, going back to the Greeks, how they understood shape, how they understood form, and how they applied to art theories, right? So we have to keep that in mind, especially if you're an art major, you're an artist yourself, maybe you've taken classes in this stuff. So that will probably make it even more difficult to understand quite what Dewey's got going on here. But let's proceed anyway. Let's see what we can get out of this chapter. All right, so shape, is it the same thing as form? There's a relation, Dewey acknowledges, but we're going to see in a moment. For him, form is something different. So shape is only an element in aesthetic form. It does not constitute it. In ordinary perception, we recognize and identify things by their shapes. Even words and sentences have shapes, when heard as well as when seen. Shape in relation to recognition is not limited to geometric or spatial properties. The latter, spatial properties, play a part only as they are subordinated to adaptation to an end. This maybe sounds a bit like some of the language he's used in previous chapters, talking about the living creature adapting to its environment, using instruments, technology, to get over impediments, using media to accomplish goals and tasks, and the sort of accumulation of forces and pressure, all sort of terminating in some equilibrium, right? This is, typical Dewey, right? By now you should sort of get the picture. Okay, so again, the spatial properties are subordinated to adaptation to an end. Very abstract. So what's he saying here? He's going to give some examples. Shapes that are not in our minds associated with any function are hard to grasp and retain. The shapes of spoons, knives, forks, household articles, pieces of furniture are means of identification because of their association with purpose, right? So we can see a silhouette of a fork, a spoon, and a knife, and immediately, we recognize it as such. It's an immediate thing because of our use of it and experience and its adaptability to certain functions. Up to a certain point, then, shape is allied with form in its artistic sense. In both, there is organization of constituent parts. Okay, so shape always involves an organization of constituent parts, especially as we recognize shape in experience. We see shapes insofar as they are functional or they get in the way of functioning, right? Remember, Dewey is a pragmatist. He sees our human experience with the world is dealing with obstacles, overcoming these obstacles. And so shapes are either ways around those obstacles, or in fact, they are obstacles themselves. So once we become familiar with certain shapes as being instrumental in helping us achieve certain goals or certain ends, having a certain purpose we associate them with, they become much more recognizable. And so in a certain sense, there's something about shape that is similar to form, because form for Dewey ultimately has something to do with an organization of constituent parts, and how we experience shape in our life is a sort of organizing function of the human mind. I hate to use the word mind. I think Dewey would hesitate, but it's a part of our engagement with the world, right? Dealing with shapes, dealing with spatial properties, and understanding them through adaptation. So shape and form differ generically. So again, for him, they're not the same thing, right? They have some qualities that are similar, right? Organization of parts, adapted to a certain end. So, but they differ generically. For there's more to grace than just lack of clumsiness, in the sense in which clumsy meant inefficiency of adaptation to an end. In shape, as such, adaptation is intrinsically limited to a particular end, like that of a spoon for carrying liquids to the mouth. The spoon that, in addition, has that aesthetic form called grace bears no such limitation. Okay, so when I'm talking about a spoon and the shape of the spoon, there's functional there are functional concerns, right? There are things that I need to be true of that shape in order for the spoon to do what a spoon does. As he puts it, carry liquids to the mouth. If the spoon is not designed correctly, then it's crap. It's not aesthetic, okay? But it being efficient, it being an efficient spoon, a spoon that serves its function, is not enough to make it a graceful spoon, right? That is something different, right? So the shape of the spoon is what helps it serve its function, to carry liquids to the mouth. But if it's a pretty and a graceful and a beautiful spoon, that's something additional. That's something different. So for Dewey, it is by form, if we understand that in the sense of an adapted shape, right? The understanding form as this shape that's adapted to our purposes. So it's by form understood in that way, although for Dewey that's not really quite correct. If you understand form that way, we both identify and distinguish things in perception by this sort of understanding of form. We distinguish chairs from tables, right? A table is shaped a certain way because it has a certain function. So is a chair, okay? Their shape has a lot to do, and it's organized with a reference to that purpose, with a reference to that function. So again, it's by form that we identify and distinguish things in perception. Chairs from table, a maple from an oak. Since we note or know them in this way, this is how we distinguish them in experience. And since knowledge was believed to be a revelation of the true nature of things, it was concluded that things are what they are in virtue of having intrinsically certain forms, right? Forms in the sense of adapted shape. Moreover, since things are rendered knowable by these forms, right? That's primarily how we engage with objects. We know them by their shape as adapted function, right? Sorry, as an adapted, sorry, form is an adapted shape. Since we know them by these forms, in that sense, it was concluded then that form is the rational, the intelligible element in the objects and events in the world. This is a very Platonic move. My students at U of H, if you're watching this video, we covered Plato, and so this should sort of ring a little bit of a bell. It shouldn't be too obscure, right? This is a very Platonic way of seeing the world, right? Form is something rational, intelligible, unchangeable. It's how we know the object. And this is set over against matter, the latter being the irrational, the inherently chaotic and fluctuating stuff upon which form was impressed. It was as eternal as the latter was shifting. So form is this eternal thing, matter is something that is always changing. The only distinction important in art is that between matter inadequately formed and material completely incoherently formed. So he's taking more of an Aristotelian approach here. He's not mentioning Aristotle, but this is something that Aristotle had problems with Plato's metaphysics. For Aristotle, and we did cover this in class again for those of my UH students who are watching this. For Aristotle, you cannot separate matter and form, right? Matter is always has some form to it, and you can only separate the two in thought. So in a certain sense, he's saying pretty much the same thing as, or Dewey's repeating pretty much what Aristotle has already said, and he's stepping away from the Platonic approach. Okay, so are we getting closer to a clear idea of what Dewey means by form? I warned you, not really, right? It has something to do with organization of parts, obviously. We kind of hinted at that already. But like I said, we're going to have to kind of wait until we get to the end of the video before we get just sort of an in-your-face, clear definition of form from John Dewey. Well, let's read this long quote I have here, right? He talks about form in the industrial arts, right? So we make things like spoons and forks and utensils and pottery and things, right? These are products of the industrial arts. At least they are now. Maybe they weren't always this way, right? So what about form in this context? What does he say about that? Let's read the quote here. Objects of industrial arts have form. They're adapted to their special uses. These objects take on aesthetic form, whether they're rugs, urns, or baskets, when the material is so arranged and adapted that it serves immediately the enrichment of the immediate experience of the one whose attentive perception is directed to it. Okay, so now we're getting a bit of a hint. That's a long phrase, right? It's quite a mouthful there. Pretty abstractly stated. But now we're getting a hint of what he means by form, right? The material is arranged and adapted so that it serves immediately the enrichment of the immediate experience of the one whose attentive perception is directed to it. Okay, so that's, form is this organization of material that helps to sort of enrich our experience of, things that we're already attentive to. No material can be adapted to an end, be it that of use as spoon or carpet, until raw material has undergone a change that shapes the parts and that arranges these parts with reference to one another with a view to the purpose of the whole, right? So again, it has a lot to do with this organization, this relationship of the parts, but not just parts. He's not talking about parts strictly in terms of physical parts and material parts. He's even talking, I think, about the elements, right? The elements of what goes in what order and how it's placed, okay, and all that sort of stuff, not just spatially, but the pacing of it, I suppose, temporally. Hence, the object has form in a definitive sense. When this form is liberated from limitation to a specialized end and serves also the purposes of an immediate and vital experience, the form is aesthetic and not merely useful. And again, so he's drawing a distinction here between an object like a spoon that's just useful and one that is serving purposes that is immediate and purposes of an immediate and vital experience. And I don't think, to be honest with you, he's that clear about the difference. In fact, in some of the earlier chapters, it seems like an immediate and vital experience is, in a certain sense, somehow. Well, I don't know. Maybe I should be careful here. Maybe I'm being too critical and jumping the gun. He does distinguish between practical activity in the earlier chapter on having an experience, chapter 3, but remember, he does say that practical experience can be aesthetic. So I guess what he's saying here too is that these practical activities that are merely useful can be aesthetic as well, if the parts are all coherent and it intensifies them, right? It enriches the immediate experience of the one whose attentive perception is directed to it, right? As he says. So he talks about design and how it has something to do with form. So again, the design of a building, of a house, right, for instance, but also the design of a novel. There's several senses of the word design. And he mentions a couple here, right? So he says that it's significant that the word design has a double meaning, at least, maybe more. It signifies purpose and it signifies arrangement, right? And I'm imagining my students probably aren't as familiar with the first use of the word design. It's my design to do this. I design. Typically they think of design as, again, arrangement, mode of composition. The design of the house is the plan upon which it is constructed to serve the purposes of those who live in it. So it has a design in the sense of the arrangement of the rooms, but it also has a design in the sense of it has a function. It has a design to serve the purposes of the inhabitants. The design of a painting or a novel is the arrangement of its elements by means of which it becomes an expressive unity in direct perception, right? So it's an arrangement of the elements, but in order to express something unified in the direct perception of those who are reading the novel or looking at the painting. In both cases, Dewey writes, there's an ordered relation of many constituent elements. The characteristic of artistic design is the intimacy of the relations that hold the parts together. In a house, we have rooms and their arrangement with respect to one another. In the work of art, the relations cannot be told apart from what they relate, except in later reflection. A work of art is poor in the degree in which they exist in separation, as in a novel wherein plot, the design, is felt to be superimposed upon incidents and characters, instead of there being their dynamic relations to one another. To understand the design of a complicated piece of machinery, we have to know the purpose the machine is intended to serve, and how the various parts fit into the accomplishment of that purpose, right? So as we're reading the novel, right, some of the episodes might be disjointed or out of place. Dewey, he's not criticizing that, I think, here. As long as when we're finished with the novel, we can kind of see a unity of the plot. And those episodes, those chapters or whatever, these little incidents and characters that happen within the novel aren't so obtrusive that they disturb the overall unity, the overall design, the term that he's using here, of the overall novel. So only when the constituent parts of a whole have the unique end of contributing to the consummation of a conscious experience, right? He loves to use that word consummation, right? The aesthetic in our experience always involves this for him, a consummation. There's strife, there's obstacles, there's implements to get over these obstacles. We use artistic mediums to express these impulses that we have, the self encountering the environment, and there's always this consummation of conscious experience, right? But again, only when the parts of the whole contribute to this do design and shape lose this superimposed character. They're not forced on the novel, right? The writer doesn't just throw them in there because they're fun and interesting. They actually work to forward the plot, the purpose of the plot. So only then do they become form. They cannot do this so long as they serve a specialized purpose. While they can serve the inclusive purpose of having an experience only when they do not stand out by themselves, but are fused with all other properties of the work of art. Why do I have a picture here of Kanye West, totally interrupting Taylor Swift, right? I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this event. It kind of happened a while ago. It's been over 10 years, I think, since this happened. But anyway, this is sort of, I think, I was just looking for, I was trying to find a visual representation of this. It's sort of like hogging the ball, right? I guess is maybe the metaphor you might want to use if you're, a sports fan, if you're hogging the ball, right? You're sort of taking the spotlight, and it's just distracting, right? So if you're at the Video Music Awards or wherever the heck this was, I don't even remember I don't even remember what award show it was. I don't even watch award show. I just remember hearing about it in the media, right? But Kanye West gets up while she's accepting her award, for those of you who don't know, and he says, "Oh, Beyonce should have won this," or something like that, and she's just sitting here like, and he's probably thinking in his mind how cool he is and how awesome he's, but a badass, and he's just, but everybody else is watching it like, whatever, Kanye, what a dick, just get off stage, dude. And so this is a very sort of like, I think the showman that tries to show off and kind of ruins the unity of that overall aesthetic experience. Not that award shows are much of an aesthetic experience. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of those things. But anyway, so there's got to be some unity. So if there's one part that sticks out obtrusively, it's going to get in the way of the unity of form. So this interfusion of all properties of the medium is necessary if the object in question is to serve the whole creature in his unified vitality. It therefore defines the nature of form in all the arts, right? So this interfusion of properties, right? This is what defines form in all the arts. With respect to a specialized utility, we can characterize design as being related to this and that end. One chair has a design fitted to give comfort, right? That one at the top, got the lazy boy. Another to hygiene. We got the dental chair here on the right. And a third to regal splendor. That's probably a pretty cheap chair right there, but whatever, you get the point. Little king's throne. Only when all means are diffused through one another does the whole suffuse the parts so as to constitute an experience that is unified through inclusion instead of by exclusion. Okay, so the one part doesn't exclude the function of another, right? So for instance, the dental chair, right, the way the instruments and that arm are, it doesn't get in the way of the patient sitting in the chair, the functionality of the chair, and it still has the sort of elegance of it. It doesn't, maybe you could have added a bunch of like gold plates to that little table beneath the dental instruments, all those devices, and you could have had a bunch of bling bling, right? And you're thinking, oh, that would have been cool and aesthetic, but for Dewey, it might have been obstructing the functionality of the chair, and it's poor design. It's a poor design choice, and so it's bad form. It's not a part of form if it does this, okay? So meaning also has something to do with form. Meaning is an element, right? So we're not just talking about spatial arrangement. We're not just talking about design in that double sense of the word that Dewey refers to, but also meaning itself is a part of form. So he says here, and I've got this Georgia O'Keeffe painting here, which you can actually look at sideways too. It works both ways. So you tilt your head to the side and look at it horizontally. It's a little bit a little vulvic looking, but whatever. So meaning, right? How does this relate to form? Sense qualities are the carriers of meaning. We talked a bit about this in the last video. Okay, so the work of art isn't a representation. It actually it's a presentation. It's an expressive object in its own self. So these sense qualities are the carriers of meaning. We see the work of art, and we directly intuit the meaning, especially the sort of emotional meaning behind works of art. So not as vehicles carry goods, okay, but as a mother carries a baby when the baby is part of her own organism. Interesting metaphor. So works of art, like words, are literally pregnant with meaning, right? This painting, he's going to say, is if it's a good painting, it's pregnant with meaning. And in other words, when I look at it, all sorts of interpretations offer themselves to me, and it's infinite amount of possibilities depending on who I am, what life experience I have had. Maybe I've been to this lake, right? This Lake George that she's I hate to use the word representation because Dewey doesn't like it, but this is a painting of Lake George by Georgia O'Keeffe, and maybe I've been to that lake and it sort of evokes a sort of emotion out of me. Maybe I've never been to that lake. I haven't, right? So I'm just looking at it purely aesthetically at the colors, and the colors are evoking all sorts of emotions in me. I like the way that they're, that it goes from light to dark, or dark to light, depending on how you look at it. Okay, and I like the way the shapes flow. There's a certain rhythm to them. It evokes a certain mood. So again, it's pregnant with meaning. Meanings have their source in past experience, right? Like just like I said, depends on where I've been and what I've seen. It's going to evoke different things for different viewers. So they have their source in past experience, and their means by which the particular organization that marks a given picture is affected. So they're what determine how I'm going to be affected by this painting, by the way it's done, by the way it's executed, by its form. They're not added, right? Meanings are not added on by association, but are either and equally the soul of which colors are the body, or the body of which colors are the soul, according as we happen to be concerned with the picture, right? Again, whether I'm focusing on the colors just as abstraction and enjoying them on that way, and getting my meaning and my satisfaction, my accumulation or consummation or whatever word Dewey wants to use in this chapter, this is going to be unique to me, right? Or whether I'm looking at the colors themselves or the impulse that might be behind the painting. Where was Georgia O'Keeffe coming from, right? What was she trying to express? What sort of human emotion was she trying to express? Okay, so that was all we were going to do with that chapter there on substance and form. So we're going to go ahead and end the video here. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'll do this quote. This is the first quote from the next chapter, right? This is chapter 7, which we're actually going to spend a little bit more time on than this last chapter. This one might actually take a couple videos. We're going to try to keep them short, 20 to 30 minutes each video. But I'm going to try to divide this next chapter, the natural history of form, into try to make it more manageable to watch. But anyway, let's read this first quote really quick. We'll wrap the video up because I think this kind of puts a nice cherry on top of that last chapter. He begins this next chapter with a nice, straight, direct definition, generic definition of form, right? What does he mean by form? And for him, form is a character of every experience that is an experience. You might have to review that chapter on having an experience to understand what he means by an experience, as opposed to just experience generally. But for him, again, form is a character of every experience that is an experience. Art, in its specific sense, enacts more deliberately and fully the conditions that affect this unity. Form, and here he gives this definition, form may then be defined as the operation of forces that carry the experience of an event, object, scene, and situation to its own integral fulfillment. Okay, so I don't think he really spoke a whole lot in that last chapter. We're talking about form, of that element of fulfillment, right? Coming to fruition. Remember, aesthetic experience is always for him the culmination of a sort of intense struggle. There's always going to be a bit of uneasiness and strife, and then consummation. But he does, I think, focus again on that last chapter on this integral part, right? Everything, all these forces operate into this unified integral, right? Connected, all one fulfillment, right? This unified fulfillment, which is aesthetic and, satisfying is probably the word that Kant would use, right? It's this sort of, for Kant to be a disinterested satisfaction, but it seems like for Dewey, far from it, right? It's an engaged, fully enlivened interaction with our environment, right? For Dewey, art is not separate from an active, involved experience. If we do that, we're veering into this snooty museum, sort of esoteric view of art. So anyway, that's all I got for this chapter, and we got a pretty decent start. We're previewing the next video for that next chapter, the natural history of form, but we're gonna go kind of loose there. Thank you for sticking around for this extra special video, kind of a bonus video for Dewey, and we'll see you on the other side.